Well, uh, very good morning. And today I'm with another important topic that is types of creative writing. Before we talk about what are the types of creative writing, let me talk about what is creative writing. I hope we have already discussed in our previous classes what exactly the creative writing is all about. But I personally felt it is good, okay, to recall what is the meaning of creative writing before we talk about the types of creative writing. Creative writing is writing that involves the imagination and invention in form and content. And it also means writing fiction, poetry, and drama. And the fiction may be long or short. The poetry may take many different forms, and the drama may be for the stage or the movies or television. Uses made materials of one kind or another. So this is what a briefly creative writing is all about. Let us talk about what are the types of creative writing, or let me talk about what are the types of writing. There are many types of writing. Suppose if you want to divide broadly, like we usually say advertisement and advice column, or autobiography, biography, blogs. Suppose if you talk about advertisements, like the examples like book review, contracts, duology, how to, and journal, news article, reader's theater script, and tabloid. When you move on to advice column, like we usually come across business letters, editorials, fables, instructions, manuals, obituary, and recipe and travel brochure, etc. Let us talk about another type of writing, that is autobiography. Autobiographies, we usually say classified ads and emails and friendly letters, interview, memos and poems, and science fiction and wanted poster. When you say biography, like there are certain things which we always cover in biography writing: comic strips, encyclopedia, game rules, invitation, a movie review, perceived, and script and web page. And the latest one, which we can talk about, another type of writing, that is blogs, community announcements, essays, horror stories, job application, mystery, postcard, speech, and western. So these are all the few types of writing, and I'm not going to focus on like what are the types of writing, but I will be focusing on like what are the types of creative writing. There are certain forms of writing which we can talk about. It's good, okay, to know like what are the forms of writing before we talk about what are the types of creative writing. Generally we come across, okay, in forms of writing like narrative writing, expository writing, persuasive writing, response to literature, creative writing, research writing, writing across the curriculum. These are all the few forms in writing. And we can also say that when you talk about, okay, different forms of writing like folk tales, fantasies, and plays, and procedural writing, comics, journals, non-fiction, fiction, narratives, and newspaper articles, letters, and poetry. These are all the few different forms of writing. Like when you talk about types of writing activities, broadly we can talk about, okay, six types. Like one is reflective writing, problem solving, explaining ideas, explaining processes, creative writing, definitions. These are all the broadly we can divide these types of writing activities. There are even five types of writing. A writer communicates important information, shares his ideas, or entertains reader with one of the five types of writing, one of which one shares ideas or entertains your readers with one of types of writing. As we already discussed, okay, persuasive, like persuasive here, I wanted to tell you that the writer tries to convenience the reader of the writer's opinion. And whereas expository, the writer tells the reader facts and details about a topic. The writer, when you talk about comparison and contrast, the writer tells us, and two topics are different. When you talk about another type of writing, that is descriptive writing, the writer tells how the topic looks, smells, and feels, and tastes or sounds. And finally, the narrative types of writing. The writer tells a true story or an imaginary story. So this is what we usually talk about. And broadly, you can even divide, okay, these four kinds of writing. One is academic and creative, journalism, and texting. When you say that academic, okay, we usually say that, okay, augment, compare, or contrast, how to, illustration, investigative, persuasive, research, APA, and Amelia. Creative, we can talk about descriptive, diaries and journals, narratives and novels and poetries. And third type of writing is that is journalism, brochures, editorials, magazines, newspapers, and pamphlets and periodicals. And fourth one is that is texting, that is social media, informal, shortcuts, and friends and families. So this is how we usually write, okay, in creative writing. So before we talk about the types of creative writing, let me just focus on what is the major difference between creative writing and fiction writing. And when you say that creative writing can be defined as any type of writing that is written with creativity or innovation. And it can also be said, okay, both fiction and non-fiction fall under this creative writing. Like examples, novels, dramas, poetry, memos, and autobiographies, and feature stories are some examples for this creative writing. Mainly requires creativity and innovation. When you say that fiction writing can be defined as a writing that involves imaginary events and characters. Fiction writing does not involve real events or people. And novels and novellas, dramas, short stories are some examples for fiction writing. And it requires both creativity and imagination. And let me talk about what is the major difference between this creative writing and academic writing, because we often get confused, okay, how to define them. Creative writing is all about it strives for the beauty and art, and it also tries to capture interest. Creative writing uses following a creative language, and creative writing judged by literary standards. And it also says that read for personal enjoyment. And suppose when you talk about the word creative, we usually come across writing short stories, essays, web contents, speeches, and articles. Let me talk about what exactly, what are the pieces of writing, okay, which cover in creative writing. A descriptive writing, fairy tales, diaries or journals, and legends, narratives and novels, personal stories and poetry, I, first and third person, characterizations, dialogues, entertainment value, informal language, may learn in a life lesson, plot, setting, short story elements, and tells a story. So this is how we usually, okay, these are all the points, okay, which cover in creative writing. Let me talk about the main topic, okay, what we have, okay, talk, we have been talking about types of creative writing. Broadly, you can divide them three types: fiction writing, poetry writing, non-fiction writing. Like when you talk about fiction writing, what I mean to say that, okay, it covers short stories, novels, and dramas, whereas poetry writing involves poems and sonnets. Non-fiction writing, diaries, like journals and memos. These are all the three important types of creative writing we have. And yeah, there you can add even some more things like poetry, plays, movies and television scripts and memos, and fictions like novels and novellas and short stories and songs, speeches, and personal essays. So these are all the few types of creating we have. Uh, Poetry, plays, movies, and television scripts, and fiction, novels, and short stories, and speeches, memos, and personal essays. Let us talk about storytelling. Like, what are the points okay, which involve when you start writing a storytelling? It's very important to focus on history, words, the selection of vocabulary, and trust, memory, and experience. These are all the few points okay, which you need to cover when you narrate a story. And we can also say it also tells a story has a beginning, and story should have a beginning, middle, and end. And it will have a characters, and it will also have even a setting, and has events and details. That is what narrative writing is all about. And how do we end okay this narrative writing? Make sure that you will end up with okay some important points what I'm going to deal with. And narrative writing ending resolve the problem and tie up loose ends and leave the reader with a lasting impression. And narrative writing ending also ends also leaves the reader with a message, and your ending can be happy or sad. So these are all the few points okay how we conclude writing this narrative piece of writing. It is always good okay to make use of some kind of imagery, like in creative writing, like auditory. Like when you talk about auditory piece of imagery, we could say that it describes us what we hear, like music, silence, noise. And whereas visual, it describes us what we see, colors and patterns and shapes and size. And tactile, it say that okay, it describes what we touch, feel, like texture, movement, temperature. And gustatory describes what we taste: sour, taste, sweet, acidic, bitter, and salty. And olfactory describes what we smell: nice fragrances like bad odors. Yeah, these are all. This is how we usually okay use or makes use of imagery in our writings. How do you develop okay this plot? I know that many of you asked me less how to begin with and how to okay make you. So there are some points which you need to be careful and cautious while writing, or maybe any kind of story or any kind of piece of writing. Like fantasy is one of the most important point okay, which you need to consider while developing a plot in a story. And confrontation, like goal, fortune, a rivalry, and mystery and temptation, discovery, loss, transformation, love, chase, and sacrifice, adventures, and challenges. These are all the few okay we can with which we can develop okay a plot. And there are some of the different types of non-fiction texture like autobiography, biography, essays, and oration or speech, diary, newspaper stories, and magazine articles. When you talk about these types of non-fiction, we usually talk about biographies and non-autobiographies, letters, journals, and diaries, essays and articles, informational texts. I hope you are quite familiar with, you are already familiar with, okay, what is the difference between biographies and autobiographies. Biographies usually tell the story of someone's life from the perspective of another writer, whereas autobiographies tell the story of the author's life and reflect the writer's thoughts and feelings about events. And letters, very well about, are written forms of communication from one person to another, whereas journals and diaries, records of daily events and writers' thoughts and feelings about them, can be provided public. And essays and articles, brief written works about a specific topic, purpose might be to explain, persuade, to or inform. And informational texts or written documents such as textbooks, applications, instructions, and articles. So these are all the few points which I wanted you to remember. Like, let me talk about what is the writing process, because many of my students, they asked me, like, what is the process and how to begin with. There are a few important steps, okay, in writing, which I wanted you to take care. And that is, broadly, we can divide them: pre-writing and compose and evaluate and revise and edit and publish. And what I mean to say, pre-writing is all about thinking about a topic, like brainstorming and planning. When you say drafting, like quickly putting all the thoughts on the paper. Revising means like reworking or the organization and details. Editing, reviewing and correcting spelling, grammar, capitalization and punctuation. Evaluation, you know very well about reflecting and assessing what has been written. And finally, we go for a publication, that is sharing final writing with others. These are all the few important steps which involve in writing process. And what are the traits of writing? Putting it all together, like ideas, organization, voice, and word choice, and sentence fluency, conversations, and presentations. So these are all the few important steps which I wanted you to take care. Like when you say that ideas, choose an interesting topic, focus on what matters to you. And when you talk about organization, it is the structure of the piece, introduce beginning, middle, and ending. Voice is the person behind the work. Make your writing sound like you. Show that you care about the topic. And word choice is the very important one. It is the use of rich language, use precise language, choose specific nouns and active verbs. Sentence fluency is the structure and flow of sentences, and make your writing smooth and easy to read aloud. Conventions are the rules that guide readers toward meaning. Check spellings and capitalizations, pronunciation, and grammar. And finally, that is presentation is how the writing looks on the page. Make the overall preparation and pleasing to the eye. If you have any queries and questions, you can comment in chat box. And thank you so very much. Have a great day.